Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm Julie Rodriguez Widholm, Executive Director of Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful sunny day inside the Osher Theater. We're thrilled for all of you to be here to celebrate our newest exhibition, Rhapsody, works from the Cooper Rosenwasser collection, beautifully curated by BAMPFA's Chief Curator, Margot Norton, with Curatorial Associate Tausif Noor. It really is a joy to gather on the occasion of this remarkable exhibition. I hope some of you had a chance to see it downstairs in our lower level galleries before this talk, but really even more so extraordinary to hear from the amazing people whose vision made today possible, Penny Cooper and Rena Rosenwasser. For 50 years, Penny Cooper and Rena Rosenwasser have been bound by a love of art and each other. This spring, we celebrate their golden anniversary, their pioneering collection, and their incredible generosity. I think this is a room full of loved ones, friends, and family, but just in case you're not familiar with Penny, she's a renowned criminal defense attorney and a former BAMPFA, former and current BAMPFA board member for more than 30 years. She's been on our board. She's been a guiding force in advancing our mission, supporting artists, and expanding access to art and film for audiences in Berkeley and beyond. Rena is a poet and founder of Kelsey Street Press, which has supported and published experimental writing, poetry, and art by women since 1974. Lots of great things have happened in the last 50 years. Together, they have championed women artists long before others. Their collecting practice, thoughtful, bold, and deeply personal, reflects a profound belief in art as a catalyst for connection. It's therefore especially meaningful for BAMPFA to present Rhapsody, works from the Cooper Rosenwasser collection, an exhibition organized on the occasion of Penny and Rena's landmark promised gift of nearly 150 artworks from their collection to BAMPFA. Today, we celebrate something truly rare, the transformation of a deeply personal collection into a public legacy. Comprising painting, sculpture, photography, textile, and installation works spanning from the mid-1960s to the present, Rhapsody celebrates the tremendous contributions of women artists. This kind of gift is how we alter the course of art history, by influencing what is studied, learned, and displayed well into the future. For this generation of UC Berkeley students, these stories are not the exception, but the rule. For the conversation today, we're also thrilled to be joined by artist and BAMPFA Advisory Board member Katherine Wagner, whose work is also featured in the Cooper Rosenwasser collection and exhibition. Katherine's ambitious photographic practice investigates the systems and inner workings of institutional spaces, from science labs to theme parks, as well as our own museum. The work on view in the exhibition was taken in our administrative offices, in fact, during the construction of this very building. Thanks to Chief Curator Margot Norton for her inspired leadership on the significant promised gift, exhibition, and publication, and Tausif Noor, Curatorial Associate, whose research and writing enriched this project at every turn. Margot will moderate today's conversation with Penny, Rena, and Katherine, so please help me welcome them to the stage.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you to everyone for being here with us this afternoon. I am just so deeply honored to be joined here on stage by three women that I greatly admire. Here, let me get that on for you. Penny Cooper and Rena Rosenwasser, whose gorgeous collection is on view downstairs, and one of my favorite artists here in the Bay Area, Katherine Wagner. I'm just going to jump in because we have, this hour to hear all of your amazing stories. And all three of you have been so pivotal to the arts community here at Berkeley, the Bay Area, and here especially at BAMPFA. I thought we could actually just jump in by asking each one of you to speak about your relationship to this place. I realize that we kind of need to get to discussing the show, but all of you have made such an impact here in the Bay Area. And I know actually we're joined here in this audience by so many others who've also made such a great impact here at BAM PFA. And it's a real honor to be here today and to continue in this path with all of you. And I thought we could start with you, Penny.
Well,
Tell us a bit about how you came to Berkeley. And I need to hear the story about People's Park and how you started your career.
okay. Can you hear me here? Okay, great. I came to Berkeley to go to law school in 1961. In fact, one of my law school classmates is here with me today. Are you hearing? Dan? I came from the University of Colorado. My family and I lived in Denver. And when I started thinking about going to law school, the dean at the University of Colorado said I could probably get into even a better school than they had there. And since I had relatives here on the West Coast, I decided to come to Berkeley. So I came to Berkeley in 61, graduated from law school in 64. And at that time, the law school was across the street from what we called University Art Museum, this museum, in its earlier embodiment. And as a relief from the law classes, which I needed desperately, I would wander across on occasion to the University Art Museum. And I got my first, museum blood there. So, and here I am today with part of my house inside of your museum.
And could you share a little bit more too about what you've done, kind of how you started the
Much, but
oh come on.
I was able to graduate from law school, and I went to work in the Alameda County Public Defender's Office, and I was there about 3 or 4 years, and decided to go into to private practice, and I rented a place, house, right near Shattuck Avenue, and I started just as I started practicing. People's Park happened, and at that time, everybody you knew or had associates with was getting arrested, because that's what People's Park was about. If you walk around, you got arrested. And the lawyers around the community charged their usual representation fee, which in those days was like about $1,000 for a misdemeanor. And I went to an assembly of people that got arrested at People's Park and said that if they wanted a good private lawyer, they could get me for $100. And was the start of my practice. And it grew from there. And it sort of grew into all of this. So I loved Berkeley. I do still love Berkeley. I live in Berkeley. Rena and I live in Berkeley Hills. And then shortly we'll tell you about where we live and how we live.
I came to Berkeley in 1971. I didn't meet Penny till 76. When I came to Berkeley, it was the beginning of the second wave feminist movement, and I was pretty immersed in it. I remember going to meetings at the Feminist Institute, and we all sat around in a very large circle discussing things. And then I also belonged to the Berkeley Poets Co-op with other poets. And the women in the group, when they read their poems to the men said, "Oh, that's not a subject for a poem. That's not right." And after a while, we all got pissed off. So the women that were in that group formed their own reading, writing group. And out of that, Kelsey Street Press emerged in 1974 to publish work by women. One of the co-founders and myself are here today, Patricia Deans-Frye. And there were 4 other women, and different members came and went, but Patricia and I sort of hung in there for almost 50 years. The press continues today, and it would be the 52nd year of the press. The archives are in the Bancroft Library. I was, so pretty immersed in feminism. I also remember my brother was at Cal Arts. He's here today, Robert. And he said to me, "You got to come down and see this show." The women at Cal Arts who were part of the feminist art program there that was run by Judy Chicago and I just forgot her name.
Miriam Shapiro.
All right, Miriam Shapiro. They had taken over this abandoned house in Hollywood, did a little construction there, and each of them did an installation throughout the house. There were things like the bridal staircase, the menstrual bathroom. Woman House, I think it opened in 72, got a huge amount of press throughout the whole country. It was really a big deal. So those are sort of my background before I met Penny.
So I have never lived in Berkeley, but I visited often. I was born in San Francisco. My mother came from Manila and my father came from Germany. They met in Manila. And so we were first generation, and education was very important in my family. So we were encouraged at a really early age to go to lectures, go to museums. And I found myself early on coming to the University Art Museum, and I loved the architecture of the old museum, and this one too. So I spent a lot of time even in high school and in college, coming to the University Art Museum, and I kind of grew up looking at matrix shows, and felt like that was part of the language that I wanted to understand. I don't have a traditional art school background. I was really much more involved in studying philosophy, architecture, how cities come together. What's that silent demarcation line that says a city begins and ends here? And I was ended up doing projects like the building of the Moscone Center in San Francisco, which changed the face of how San Francisco is now. And then the project after that was called American Classroom. And I looked at the receptacle of the classroom as kind of an arena for our aspirations, what language is left on the board, what are our, who are we and who are we going to become? So at that point, I realized that the transfer of knowledge was like a really important foundation about my work. And as Julie had mentioned earlier, I've done very disparate projects, but there, I think, is a through line and linkages and lineages through looking at classrooms, science institutions. Construction sites were really important to me. They became like this foundation of a metaphor for change, and change being a common denominator in all our lives. And I did work on the building of this building, which is one of the pieces in the exhibition.
Well, I love that, Catherine. I also just love, I think sometimes the perspective of museums is that we're these like dusty places that are, always never changing, a place where knowledge is like contained, but in fact they're made of people, and they kind of change as the people change. And it's interesting to think of that through the context of your work, and also your relationship to Berkeley, all of your relationship to Berkeley, and how, you've been so key in transforming this place too. And to get to the, exhibition, which it falls under this year's historic occasion, because not only is it, the announcement of this really transformative gift to the institution and our exhibition, but it also marks the 50th anniversary of Penny and Rena's relationship. Oh. And I just, well, so first of all, happy anniversary. And second of all, I would love to hear the story about how you two met and, started this journey together.
we had a mutual friend, one of my tennis partners, in fact, who wanted us to meet, not in any way hoping that we would get together as a couple, but because we were the only people she had ever met, especially in Berkeley, that were interested in contemporary Italian design. It was the 70s. And that really, we met over dinner.
Contemporary Italian design. No, where there's an image of your home behind us. It's just really amazing timing there.
Well, what's curious about us, I don't think it's true of too many couples. Whenever we're, looking at art and picking out pieces that we want to purchase, we almost always agree, which is very rare in couples, I've heard. Very, very rare.
I can talk about our house a little bit.
Yeah.
So when I was in the public defender's office, I had a good friend who was also a lawyer. His name was Doug Rick. He was an older, much older than the rest of us. He'd been actually the director of corrections for the state of California. And he had this amazing wife, Louise Ridd. She was neither a decorator, a designer, or an architect, or an artist, but sort of a mixture of all of those. And she had this house designed and built for her in Berkeley on Tamalpais Road. And I went to see that house, and I just thought, oh, this is heaven. And I asked her at a certain point whether she might be interested in maybe designing and directing the building of a house for me. And she said she'd think it over. And then she called me 2 days later and said, I found you a lot. So I had a house custom built in the Berkeley Hills where we reside now. It's all redwood and glass. You could see in the slides a lot of it now. And it looked fine the way it was, but I always thought it would look better with art. And shortly thereafter, I met Rena. So here was the deal. I had a house. Now I needed a maid. And I struck it rich.
And so this show is titled Rhapsody, which is after a work which is included in the slides by Jennifer Bartlett. And that piece I know was kind of the spark that started your collecting journey. And would love to hear a bit about what it was about that piece that, you decided to start collecting and supporting women artists.
We saw the piece originally, this big, enormous piece of 600, maybe 700. Oh, sorry. We saw this piece at the old SF MoMA, which was on Van Ness Street, and it was in an immense room. They were on sort of square enamel panels that were silk screened with grids and then painted on. The piece just blew us away. It sort of took on all of art history, line, mountain, shape. And it was like, because, with my feminist thing, God, this woman's really done it. And we were very excited. So we looked at the label at the end and we saw she had a show at Fuller Goldine Gallery at that very moment. So we went to Fuller Goldine Gallery and we bought our first major piece, which is called Binary Combinations, which is in the first room of the show.
Yeah, it's the work that kind of starts off the exhibition. A really beautiful piece. The image here doesn't do it justice. Yeah, you have to see it in person. And then after buying that work, what was it that spurred your interest in collecting women artists in particular? I mean, obviously with Kelsey Street Press, there was this support of women artists that you were doing, but to devote your collecting to women artists, solely is, quite radical gesture, especially at that time.
Well, I have a story, and it involves Annie Philbin, and she probably doesn't remember it because I know she's here today. Sorry, not tonight. I was in New York visiting a friend of mine, Philip Yenawin, and Philip and Annie and I were eating oysters somewhere uptown. something like that. Again, this happened sometime it might have been the 80s or the 70s. Anyway, and I said to her, because I was visiting a lot of galleries, I said, how come all the galleries are owned by women, but none of the artists are women? And she said to me, because people don't buy art by women. And so I said, ah, ha, ha. And so from that moment on, I realized this is what we need to do.
No, it's really extraordinary, and I think it's interesting. When we were doing the interview for the catalog, I remember you were saying like you don't consider yourself collectors because that's not the end of your support. It's like and a lot of the artists in your collection too aren't necessarily it's just the objects that you're collecting, but they're deep relationships with artists. And I also wanted to mention that there's this great text in the book by an artist named Kiki Smith. And when I was kind of having a conversation with her, in developing this piece, she told this really great story about how when she was showing her work, she would ask her gallerist, Joe Fabush at the time, how come no one is buying my work? And then she said she would look at works, like some of them that you'll see in the exhibition downstairs. One is called Baby with Placenta. There's an image of that. Or this untitled scroll piece with sperm kind of cascading down. And she'd say, no wonder people don't want my art for their living room. And then right after she said that, she said, but Penny and Rena, they bought my work for their home. And I love that story because it shows how you have supported artists' visions, oftentimes radical visions or visions that were artists that were making something different, artists that were kind of challenging the status quo. And I just wanted to mention that because that is really who you are. That's what you continue to do. And when you do buy a work of art, it's because you're also supporting the work of an artist who is doing something differently. And Penny's going to say something.
I just want to add something about that piece that draped our wall at the Kiki Smith piece. That's you could yeah, it wasn't. It's entitled Sperm, and when I would take people through the house, I would say, "This is the only sperm in the house."
Okay. How do we follow this? But I mean, it's amazing. Kiki also is an artist that's featured broadly in your collection. Also, Catherine, you have 3 works of Catherine's in your collection as well. I wanted to ask you a bit also about what it means to you to develop these relationships with artists and to collect artists in depth in that way.
Well, one of the poets that Kelsey Street Press published, who's one of my favorite poets, Maymay Bersenbrugge, did a poem called I Love Artists. And I also love artists. So developing relationships along the way with various artists has been one of the great pleasures in my life, really. The artists, the visual artists and the poets. I think if you deleted that from my past, my life would be like meaningless, really. It's just so important to me.
And I have to ask, Catherine, how did you meet Penny and Rena?
The censored story or the uncensored story?
Oh, you know what we're here for.
So, well, we met, my partner Loretta Garg and I, we met Penny and Rena at a series of dinner parties. And Penny and I got sat next to one another at one of the parties, I think the first one. And I think we just entertained each other all night and were just laughing and just had a great time. And then we were at other art dinner parties and mingled with each other. And then I knew I liked them and I knew Loretta liked them a lot. But then we got this call and they said, we know you guys like to hike. Would you like to meet Rena? I think the call came from Penny. Would you like to meet Rena and I to go hiking to see the big trees in Sequoia National Forest? And I asked Loretta, and she's like, yeah, I'd like to do that. So we made this arrangement, and they said, well, we booked these rooms at the lodge at the Sequoia National Forest or Park, and we'll meet you there. You guys drive your car. And so we said, okay. So we're supposed to meet. Loretta and I were like, we're foodies, and we knew they were foodies, and that we were going to hike long, one day long, and then have a lunch, and then the next day would be a shorter hike. So we're driving down, and we get this call, and we're all the way down near Fresno, and I'm like, where are we going? And they're like, you're not here yet. And they go, you have to go to Bakersfield. And I looked at Loretta, I said, are these women trying to kidnap us? I said, we had never gone so far in terms of trying to go for a 3-hour walk. So we get there, and it was incredibly lovely. And they said, okay, tomorrow we're starting out on this trail. And my partner's a landscape architect and very involved in native plants. And so Rena and Loretta are walking and identifying every plant in Latin. And we brought this lovely picnic. They brought a picnic, we brought a picnic. We were going to commingle our picnics when we reached a certain lake. But as we're walking on the trail, we are seeing a lot of bear scat, and it's steaming. And I'm thinking to myself, that means it's like fresh. Like they've been here in a few minutes. So we walk to our lake, and we have this spread of like these amazing cheeses, and then Penny and Rena pull out this vintage bottle of Sauterne, and we're not day drinkers. And so we're just having this lavish meal, and we start back on the trail, and there's even more bear scat with fresher steam. And we took turns carrying the backpack, and it was my turn to carry. Then we didn't finish the lunch. It was just too much. And I said, what happens if a bear really comes? And these guys are still, now Penny's with Loretta, and they're looking at stuff, and Rena's with me, and we're walking ahead. And I said, what would we do? And the next thing you know, this bear the size of a little Volkswagen Beetle comes charging down this very steep cliff right in front of us, taking out all the bushes. And I go, what do we do? Shall I throw the food? And they all in unison said, no. So I was left to be eaten by the bear.
So you know how memory is funny. This happened a long time ago. So my memory of the hike.
By the way, I have no memory.
My memory of the hike is that Loretta and I were behind Catherine, and 3 baby bears rushed down the path behind us. And my another memory is not only did they come they brought their espresso machine so we could have avocados in the room. I couldn't believe that.
Not avocados, affogato.
I deny all knowledge.
So, okay, that was the story of how we met, and we became fast friends after that. And in going to their house for the first time, one of the first pieces I saw there was that Mona Hatoum piece, which is in the exhibition downstairs. And I thought to myself, these people are incredibly substantive and serious about the art they collect. Because how many people in a domestic space would have a piece that is a sculpture, but also the other part of that piece is rendered in confection sugar, almost like a photogram on the floor. And I thought the care that must go into keeping that piece, I had just the utmost respect for them. So.
No, here. That story, I'm sorry. I'm so
There's no 3 bears. That's a fairy tale. No. It's a fairy.
amazing. Catherine, I want to hear a little bit about the work of yours in the show because it's a really special piece. It was actually shot in, I think it's where my office is, on the 3rd floor of the museum, which is really amazing. I might actually stop the scroll just to go to this image and just to hear a little bit about that work, and your desire to shoot inside the museum during that period of transition. Oh, there it is. Stopping.
Okay, so that one. So the museum was under construction, and I'm very interested in construction as a metaphor for change. And I'm also very interested in probably a book of mine I did a few years ago is called Place, History, and the Archive. So I'm very interested in archives and who decides what gets saved in archives. All of those kinds of decisions about how history is told. And I've done these projects called Reclassifying History, which I think a lot of museums are now engaged in. But I'm also looking at, like, in the building of this museum from its inception, there were these kind of corporeal moments throughout any construction site that always reminds me of the body. And none of my work has the presence of a person, but has the implied presence and the corporeal presence of a person. So when I came to this floor, which is literally where Margot's and Tausif's office is upstairs, I was intrigued by these vents that were both breathing for the building, taking air out, and then at times bringing air in. And so there was a real interesting moment for me about that that notion of breath and that what this would become. And it's led me to I've done other projects like this for the De Young Museum when they were first the new De Young, the Herzog and Demeron Museum, but specifically about their collection. I was commissioned to do something for that. So I'm very interested in not just the building of this museum, but also the archives and how film, the PFA is such an important part of this museum. And I was so interested in getting access to the archives of the Pacific Film Archive. And because I knew I had been wanting for a long time to work inside film archives, specifically with the titles of films and rearranging them. And don't worry, I put them back in the place that they were archived. I had a babysitter there to direct me to that. But so I did a whole series of work called Moving Images, and that's one of them. And that's what I call kind of an establishing shot, where you're just looking at kind of the formal qualities of all these colors of films, but then went deeper into thinking about how these titles juxtapose together, how that they are these cultural reflections. So there was like A Fish Called Wanda, The Graduate, and I started making these new narratives that were not told in the way that the films had been delivered chronologically. So museums are containers of information that are so important. And I think shedding light and seeing a different facet from what the curators are doing is just another way of kind of bringing more information out.
No, we're really thrilled also to have this work in our collection. And I just love it too, how it's like there's something too about like demystifying, all of those things and those decisions that are actually quite important. Those structures that exist within any institution that one often doesn't see. And I did also want to mention a little bit about this installation of the show downstairs. One of the things that we were thinking about, and I'm just going to scroll ahead to some images of the house, because we were thinking about too, like the way that having this art in your home, they become family members in a way. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about working with a collection, both at an institution and in one's home, is that, those stories that kind of accumulate, the ways that people engage with those objects, then, the people that have expressed something about them really becomes part of the history of those objects themselves. So even in the installation, in the exhibition, we were thinking about the ways that pieces in your collection have also had juxtaposition with one another. And I wanted to hear a little bit from the two of you, actually the three of you, to talk a little bit about some of those stories with the works.
One of the things that Penny and I always do our own installations. And we don't probably change things around as much as some collectors do, but inhabiting the spaces where there are certain resonances that occur between the pieces is very it livens my life. I mean, I just love, to see things in juxtaposition. In the show that Margot curated downstairs, her installation just really blew me away because some of it mirrored some of the things we had done in our installations, but some of the things brought in other concepts and ideas, and they spoke to each other in different ways. It's really a magnificent installation, really.
I just want to add that in terms of installing pieces in our house, we never really said let's buy a piece for that space, or let's what are we going to put on that? Well, we never did anything like that. We just looked and appreciated the work and the stories that came to us from the work, the feelings that came, and we would buy the work, and then we would think about where to put it and or where it might be in the house. So it was never like, filling a spot, or it was never like, and nothing we ever purchased was like that.
I'm drawn to the way that the two of you think so differently. I mean, Rena's a poet. She's really engaged in the life of the mind and language. And Penny has come from this world of like specificity and pragmatics. And yet, she talked about finding your way to the museum, like walking out of a law class and coming to the museum. And Rena's been drawn to it for her whole life. And I'm drawn to the way that abstraction and has become like this unified land, or the desire to look at a lot of abstraction, and not that everything is, but it's basically a foundation of a lot of your collection, and how the two of you are so different. And at the same time, I feel like each one of you from your intellectual and emotional perspectives are climbing a similar mountain, albeit choosing different paths.
Penny's background, not only is she a lawyer, but her background in art was very different than mine. I grew up in New York City, and basically I spent a lot of my childhood getting away from Queens, where I lived, and going to the Museum of Modern Art. It was like a very easy train stop. And I really grew up looking at modern art. I mean, I didn't discover the Renaissance or anything before till much later. And so I had a definite bias towards repetition and formalism. And I also love painting. And over the years, we've collected very few pieces of art that involved words, because all I did was read and edit, and I didn't want to look at words in my home. You might want to speak about, and Penny's background is, well, why don't you speak about it with regard to your father?
So I always felt my older brother was interior designer and worked for Herman Miller for many years. And so design and art was a big thing in my house. And when I went to undergraduate school, I had a minor in art history. So even though my whole background and everything I was doing was to be a lawyer and to be a trial lawyer and to be in the courtroom, I always felt like there was this need that I had to appreciate a huge other side of my life. And believe me, art is a huge other side of a trial lawyer's life. And so that's why when my brother had a huge influence on me, and I was really interested in design, and as I said, the art. So when I met Rena, it was just like this natural thing. I could like come home again. I also had a younger brother who went to school out here at California College of Arts, used to be called that. Now it's CCAC. And he was 10 years younger, and I wanted him to come out here to go to school, and he became a photographer. So there I had two brothers, both are gone now. And it was just a huge influenced my life. So when Rita and I got together and I had that beautiful, lovely house built, that we were right for each other.
Penny had a strong appreciation of craft, which of course I didn't have because it was, dismissed in the 70s in New York and elsewhere. So she brought that appreciation of craft that I then, began to appreciate myself. So our collecting is like a combination, but our taste is so similar. It's amazing. Yeah.
That's what 50 years will do.
No.
No, but I agree with Catherine, for how you think differently. You mentioned earlier that you don't disagree on the work that you collect. I have an image of the Viola Fry sculpture behind us. I'd love to hear your story, Penny, about this piece.
Violet Fry, she was just such a great artist, such a great character. And we loved her work, and we commissioned this work and had her, when it was installed, we had her come to our house to see the final installation. It was really very exciting. And I said to Viola, did you want to put a name on this? And she said, no. She said, do you have any ideas? And it was perfect for me because I was in the midst of a murder trial at the time. And so I said, yes, let's call it Submitted, Your Honor. And we do.
I have to mention that, bringing these works into the museum it's just, it's so exciting, but it's also, it's interesting because, we've gotten to kind of know these pieces in your home, this piece in particular, situated outside the home, and then to see it in the galleries. I wanted to ask, from your perspectives, how does it feel to see these pieces, these family members, like I mentioned before, situated here, in our museum?
Well, it feels extremely strange, let me say. And I don't particularly like the word bequeath. But it feels really, really great to have the work here in Berkeley and know that eventually it will be in Berkeley. And, we have great appreciation for the people who have directed this museum. Jackie Baus wasn't able to come here today, but she sent her best regards. And Kevin Concy has passed. Is Susan here? Yes. Susan Concy is here. Hi. Huge influence. And Larry Rinder, is he here? Okay, well, I think he's in route, maybe. And now Julie. And we're very, very grateful to Julie for shepherding this museum into its present state and for having our work, our love installed here. So it's a really great moment for both of us.
And for all of us, really. Thank you. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you. I think we're a little short on time. So if it's all right, I think we'll open it up to see if anyone has any questions.
Is there a way to get this exhibit traveling? I know it's very expensive to do outsource your exhibit to other museums, but it really should be somewhere else too.
Well, I'm eager to have the pieces back, so I'm not so keen on having to travel.
I actually don't know about that. Maybe you could speak to that, Margo.
The plans are that the show will be up through the end of June, and then we'll go back to their home. But, one of the amazing things about having these works come to the museum into the future is that we'll be able to lend them, to institutions all over the world. And that they will be continued to be shown here at this museum and be in dialogue with our collection. So that's the goal. But thank you. I mean, it was it was such a joy and an honor to curate the show, and we're really just so happy with how it came together.
I have a question for you, Margot. When you found out that you were going to be the curator for this exhibition, what were some of the challenges that came to your mind dealing with these two lovely ladies?
By the way, this group here, 3 of them are my oldest friends, and one of them in the middle is my law school classmate.
Amazing. Well, thank you for your questions. And no, I have to say, I moved here to Berkeley for this position as chief curator. And I think, the institution that comes before me here is one that I've always deeply admired. As Catherine mentioned, like, especially like thinking about the Matrix program, the way that this institution has embraced a lot of artists, by giving them their first museum shows, by embracing work that was unlike other work that came before it, whether those artists were, a lot of them weren't well known at the time, a lot of artists, even like Joan Brown, Jay DeFeo had their first shows here. And I feel like when I met Penny and Rena, there's just so quintessential Berkeley, BAM PFA supporters. Like, there was something that, it taught me so much about this institution where I'm, taking this big role as the chief curator, and just thinking about how so many of the artists in their collection are also so deeply intertwined with the history of this place. A lot of the artists that showed here, also in that Matrix program, stayed with Penny and Rena in their home. Like, their support of artists goes way beyond this collection. And so getting to know them, to hear the stories about each of these works, to hear about when Julie Moretu, when Kiki Smith, when Cecilia Vicuña stayed with them, and those relationships, those deep relationships that are part of the history of this place, like, I just can't get enough. Like, I want to know more and more. And so I mean, certainly, like, I don't think a challenge crossed my mind. It was more of like, how can I learn the most about this history, and how can we provide the scholarship at this museum for these incredible artists? A lot of them I've worked with too in the past. So it was also just, I think, a moment where everything just seemed to click and continue to click. And it's a transformative to also have a bequest. Sorry, Penny, for the word, but to care for these works, to also enable that kind of scholarship on these groundbreaking women artists to continue into the future.
I think you can hear me. How did you choose all your pieces? Why did you choose these?
So the question was, of all of these the pieces, how did we choose these for the exhibition? So I was also really honored to work with an incredible colleague and curator, Tassif Noor, on the show, who contributed a brilliant essay to the exhibition catalog that provides really crucial context on these works. And when we were thinking about this exhibition, we also wanted to kind of think through some of the essential themes and stories that could be told through the works in the collection. I do feel that, it's one thing to put a work in a home in a specific place, but it's another thing to bring them into an institution. And we really wanted to be able to kind of showcase these artists' important contributions to art history through this presentation. So we went through the whole list of works, and we're thinking about how to further develop these themes. So the themes in the show, in the first room, you'll see a lot of artists incorporating expanded ideas of abstraction. And we were thinking too about the ways that many of these women artists in particular were engaging with legacies of minimalism, of conceptualism, and thinking around and through a lot of these movements, incorporating craft techniques in Lenore Tawney, or, kind of thinking through that systematic approach to abstraction in Jennifer Bartlett, but with this incorporation of a new technique of enamel on aluminum. And then in the second room of the exhibition, we were really inspired by Penny and Rena's home, and also your this theme of architecture and design. I mean, Catherine's work is in this section too, because it's kind of thinking through relationships to space and, the way that space can transform the body. And then the third section of that show is about the body itself. And there's a lot of works that are figurative, but they're also kind of thinking through like the interior of the body, the experience of women, the way that the body has been a battleground, which, this is, I love this room of the exhibition. I think it's a really potent room. That's the room that has Mona Hatoum as well, even like the absence of the body. So sorry, I keep going on, but I think we need to wrap up and everything. But I hope that answered your question.